Tonight's story isn't about a missile or a battlefield. It's about money, specifically the currency that powers the global oil market. You see the headlines every single day flashing across your screen, showing explosive military strikes, naval fleets maneuvering through dangerous waters, and politicians nervously debating the next tactical move on the geopolitical chessboard. But I want you to completely erase that conventional picture from your mind. Right now. Stop looking at the loud distractions. Read that again slowly. Stop looking at the loud distractions. The real war, the incredibly dangerous conflict that will actually determine the absolute fate of your purchasing power and the future of global dominance, is happening quietly in the ledgers of central banks and the hidden corridors of international denominated trade. We are witnessing a profound paradigm shift where the fundamental rules of the global economy are being aggressively rewritten. And the ultimate weapon of mass destruction is not a drone or a nuclear submarine, but a fiat currency. To truly grasp the staggering magnitude of this impending shock, we must travel back in time to understand the unprecedented historical foundation of American financial hegemony. In the year 1974, following the disastrous collapse of the Bretton Woods gold standard, the United States executed what is arguably the most brilliant and consequential geopolitical maneuver in modern human history. The Nixon administration, facing soaring inflation and a completely destabilized economy, struck a highly critical deal with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, establishing an ironclad framework that would mandate all global oil purchases be exclusively conducted in United States dollars. This was the glorious birth of the Petrodollar system. It was an absolute masterstroke of diplomacy that instantly created an artificial, permanent, and insatiable global demand for American currency. Every single nation on earth, whether they considered themselves a loyal ally to the United States or a bitter enemy, suddenly needed massive reserves of dollars simply to buy the vital energy required to keep their industrial economies running and their citizens fed. This ingenious system allowed America to effortlessly export its domestic inflation, run massive, unprecedented trade deficits, and quietly build a spectacular debt pile that now hovers around a terrifying $34 trillion domestically, while existing within a broader global debt context approaching a staggering $245 trillion. All of this was possible while maintaining an unparalleled standard of living because the rest of the world was effectively forced at gunpoint to continuously absorb those printed dollars. The petrodollar rapidly became the undisputed reserve currency of the world, granting Washington the extraordinary unchecked leverage to aggressively sanction enemies, freeze sovereign assets overnight, and ruthlessly dictate the precise terms of global trade through the monopolistic SWIFT financial messaging system. For decades, this unipolar financial system appeared completely invincible, a permanent fixture of the modern world order. But here is where the story becomes more interesting and infinitely more dangerous for the Western world. Ray Dalio, the legendary billionaire investor and meticulous historian of macroeconomic cycles, has been urgently warning us for years about the changing world order and the inevitable shifting of geopolitical tectonic plates. He accurately points out that great historical empires fall not just from devastating military defeats on foreign soil, but primarily from the gradual, insidious loss of their underlying financial supremacy. And right now, in the highly critical geographic choke point known universally as the Strait of Hormuz, we are actively seeing the terrifying beginning of the end of that exact financial supremacy. Approximately 11 million barrels of crude oil violently pass through this incredibly narrow, treacherous waterway every single day without fail. It is the undeniable jugular vein of the entire global energy supply chain. Historically speaking, whoever controlled the overwhelming military security of the strait ultimately controlled the uninterrupted flow of oil, and by direct extension, the perpetual flow of petrodollars into the Western financial apparatus. But Iran, a proud nation heavily sanctioned, economically battered, and financially isolated by the West for decades, has finally recognized a fatal glaring flaw in the seemingly impenetrable American armor. They are no longer just relying on fast-moving speedboats, outdated sea mines, and asymmetric naval warfare to mildly threaten this vital choke point. They have discovered a far more lethal, sophisticated strategy. They are quietly leveraging the rapidly shifting global alliances of the BRICS nations to strike directly at the very heart of the dollar hegemony. The persistent whispers, the diplomatic backchannels, and the overt strategic maneuvers all point to a terrifying new reality that Western media refuses to acknowledge. Iran is systematically positioning itself to allow massive oil tankers safe, unhindered passage through the Strait of Hormuz exclusively and categorically only if that precious oil is paid for entirely in Chinese yuan. Think deeply about the immense, paradigm-shattering gravity of that single condition. Read that again slowly, only if paid in Chinese yuan. This is not merely a localized regional dispute over maritime borders. It is a direct, highly calculated, and existential challenge to the entire 50-year-old petrodollar paradigm. By aggressively demanding yuan for safe maritime passage, Iran is effectively and permanently bypassing the Western-controlled SWIFT network entirely, intentionally forcing international energy buyers to actively engage with China's rapidly expanding alternative financial infrastructure, formerly known as CIPS. This single maneuver establishes a monumental, world-altering precedent. For the very first time in half a century, sovereign nations are being actively presented with a highly viable, heavily enforced, and economically attractive alternative to the United States dollar. To truly internalize what this means, I want you to imagine a hypothetical scenario. Imagine you are the newly elected leader of a rapidly growing, energy-hungry Southeast Asian nation. Your fragile developing economy is absolutely desperate for cheap, reliable energy. Every single day, your manufacturing factories need continuous power, your massive population needs transportation fuel, and your complex logistics networks demand millions of gallons of diesel. In the recent past, you essentially had absolutely no choice but to painstakingly acquire massive stockpiles of US dollars to secure those critical energy shipments from the volatile Middle East. But today, the geopolitical landscape has profoundly and irreversibly changed before your very eyes. If you stubbornly try to pay in traditional dollars, your vulnerable tankers might suddenly face mysterious, prolonged delays, heavily inflated insurance premiums, or outright aggressive harassment by naval patrol boats in the highly volatile, heavily militarized waters of the Persian Gulf. However, if you possess the courage to pivot and choose to settle that massive denominated trade cleanly in Chinese yuan, your massive vessels are suddenly and magically granted absolute VIP status, sailing perfectly smoothly and safely through the perilous Strait of Hormuz under the powerful, protective, military umbrella of a massive new Eurasian economic alliance. As a pragmatic leader, which specific option do you logically choose to protect your own people? The answer is painfully obvious. You choose the pragmatic path of least resistance. You enthusiastically choose the Chinese yuan. And in doing so, you quietly but permanently surrender your long-standing reliance on the American financial system. This seemingly hypothetical scenario is rapidly, undeniably becoming our concrete everyday reality. The stark, undeniable contrast between the loud, explosive military actions we constantly see on mainstream television and the quiet, methodical economic shifts happening deep beneath the surface is absolutely staggering to witness. While the aging Western powers continue to stubbornly measure their geopolitical power almost exclusively by the number of expensive aircraft carriers they can continuously deploy, and the sheer destructive volume of precision missiles they can violently launch, the rising Eastern powers are quietly looking at a completely different, far more critical scoreboard. They are accurately measuring their true long-term success by the staggering amount of physical, verifiable gold they are relentlessly accumulating in their central bank vaults, the rapidly growing number of bilateral non-dollar trade agreements they are formally signing outside the traditional Western system, and the steady, relentless, and unstoppable expansion of their own proprietary financial settlement networks. China has been methodically, patiently building the complex digital and institutional architecture to flawlessly support this exact critical historical moment. They have been aggressively hoarding physical gold reserves at a completely unprecedented historical pace, establishing massive, complex currency swap lines with eager central banks all around the globe, and heavily promoting the rapid internationalization of the yuan as a stable, reliable store of value. They fundamentally understand a deep historical truth. You do not truly defeat a massive, entrenched global superpower by foolishly engaging it in a direct, kinetic, military confrontation where it clearly holds the absolute, overwhelming technological advantage. Instead, you gracefully defeat it by slowly bending the underlying economic reality to your iron will, by quietly, systematically, and ruthlessly removing the foundational financial pillars that invisibly support its sprawling global empire. The mighty petrodollar is undeniably the central load-bearing pillar of the entire American empire. If it inevitably falls, the cascading economic consequences for the domestic United States economy would be absolutely devastating, resulting in nothing short of an absolute catastrophic shock to the system. Without the forced, artificial global demand for dollars, the perceived value of the currency would inevitably and violently plummet on the open international markets. The everyday cost of importing basic consumer goods would instantly skyrocket out of control, inevitably leading to severe, uncontrollable, and punishing hyperinflation that would wipe out the middle class. The previously unquestioned ability of the bloated U.S. government to easily finance its massive, spiraling national debt would be severely and permanently compromised, leading directly to skyrocketing domestic interest rates, crushing mortgage costs, and a devastating, prolonged domestic economic recession. Furthermore, the tremendous, unmatched geopolitical leverage that Washington currently enjoys to unilaterally enforce its strict foreign policy through crippling economic sanctions would simply evaporate into thin air overnight, rendering the Treasury Department toothless on the world stage. This is the absolute, undeniable, ultimate nightmare scenario for the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and the Pentagon, and it is precisely exactly what the newly solidified Iran and China strategic alliance is actively attempting to drastically accelerate. The brilliant, calculated strategy of openly using the vital Strait of Hormuz not merely as a crude, blunt military blockade, but rather as a highly sophisticated geopolitical currency filter, is a profound stroke of asymmetric strategic genius. It forcefully commands the entire watching world to finally acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that the American unipolar moment is officially and decisively over. The long-standing hegemony of the United States dollar is simply no longer a guaranteed, immutable fact of nature. It is a highly vulnerable, decaying construct that is actively, deliberately being dismantled piece by piece before our very eyes. As Ray Dalio's meticulously researched historical framework strongly suggests, we are currently witnessing the absolute classic textbook late-stage behavior of a massive global empire in severe relative decline, desperately facing a rising, highly organized challenger that is systematically, ruthlessly exploiting its deepest structural weaknesses. The frightened West is predictably reacting to these monumental developments with a toxic, ineffective mix of psychological denial and aggressive, hollow military posturing, but the massive underlying macroeconomic currents have already fundamentally reversed their historical direction. The unstoppable momentum is now firmly and undeniably with the ambitious nations that are rapidly building this complex alternative financial architecture. Every single massive barrel of crude oil that is successfully sold and settled in Chinese yuan rather than United States dollars represents a tiny, almost imperceptible structural crack in the massive foundation of the Western global financial system. But when you logically multiply that single transaction by roughly 11 million barrels a day, month after month, year after grueling year, those microscopic cracks inevitably compound, widen, and eventually cause the entire massive financial structure to violently collapse under its own unsustainable weight. We are currently living through a terrifying, exhilarating period of immense, unparalleled historical significance, a highly volatile transition phase between two completely distinct opposed eras of global economic power. The rare intellectual courage to actively see this hidden reality, to bravely look past the superficial manufactured narratives of the mainstream corporate media and truly understand the deep structural macroeconomic forces actively at play is exactly what separates the true, highly informed geopolitical insiders from the blissfully uninformed, financially vulnerable masses. You absolutely must understand that the modern global chessboard is infinitely more complex, dangerous, and nuanced than a simple, outdated game of conventional military dominance. It is a shadowy, multi-dimensional, high-stakes struggle for the absolute future of money itself. The shocking, unprecedented events rapidly unfolding in the treacherous waters of the Strait of Hormuz are definitely not an isolated, random anomaly. They are the sharp, bleeding leading edge of a massive, highly coordinated, and completely relentless global effort to permanently dethrone the undisputed king of global finance. The massive unseen shockwaves of this profound historical transition will inevitably be painfully felt in every single dark corner of the interconnected global economy, profoundly impacting everything from the soaring price of gasoline at your local neighborhood pump to the rapidly diminishing real-world value of the fragile retirement accounts you have diligently spent your entire working life painstakingly building. The ultimate stakes of this hidden war could not possibly be any higher for the average citizen. This brutal financial war is entirely 100% real, and it is actively being waged right in front of our open eyes, masterfully hidden in plain sight, purposefully behind the thick smoke and loud mirrors of conventional televised military conflict. As the distracted world nervously watches the expensive missiles fly across the night sky and the suited politicians endlessly argue on cable news, the massive, silent, and irreversible transfer of incredible wealth and immense geopolitical power continues absolutely unabated. The legendary petrodollar system, the undeniably brilliant, historically unprecedented financial mechanism that has successfully sustained immense American prosperity and global dominance for well over half a century, is now visibly facing its most terrifying, existential, and completely unavoidable threat to date. It is a critical, fleeting moment in human history that absolutely demands our full, undivided attention, our deep, relentless intellectual curiosity, and our unwavering willingness to aggressively question every single thing we ever confidently thought we knew about exactly how the modern world really, truly works behind closed doors. The incredibly consequential, world-altering decisions actively being made right now today in the heavily guarded halls of Tehran, the sprawling governmental complexes of Beijing, and the increasingly panicked corridors of Washington will undoubtedly reverberate loudly and destructively for many generations to come, violently reshaping the ultimate destiny of sovereign nations, the balance of global military power, and the very fundamental underlying definition of wealth itself. The long, prosperous era of the completely undisputed, universally accepted American dollar is rapidly and violently drawing to a chaotic close, and a totally new, highly fragmented, increasingly multipolar, and intensely competitive global financial reality is aggressively rising from the ashes to violently take its rightful place. The pressing, urgent question for every single investor and citizen is no longer if this massive paradigm-shattering shift will actually occur, but exactly how devastatingly quickly it will happen, and precisely what shattered remnants of the old world order will be left standing in its massive, chaotic wake. The incredibly powerful petrodollar system officially turned 52 years old on the exact fateful day this terrifying new phase of the hidden financial war officially began, and the entire interconnected world is currently anxiously deciding its absolute, final, and ultimate fate. Subscribe to Market Mindset so you don't miss the next deep analysis of these critical global shifts. Make sure to hit the like button if you found this breakdown valuable, and drop your opinion in the comments below on whether you think the dollar can survive this unprecedented attack.